Hi, Isaac. Happy Good Friday.
Hello, Rabbi. Good to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank
Are you fasting today?
you. No, no.
Uh, so aside from going to church online, do you celebrate Good Friday in any other ways?
Well, I mean, back in the day, we used to attend a 3 hour church service. But now I'm
Wow,
not.
back in the day. What do you do for those 3 hours? Are you able to concentrate for those 3 hours?
Yeah, yes, we can try because these words have a movement to it, and you're saying you. But I haven't fasted for Good Friday in a long while. And
So you're saying you used to, but you don't anymore?
yeah,
Oh my God, what happened?
America.
Oh my God, don't believe America for your sins. Horrible.
No, I think back in so growing up.
America makes us holier, not less holy.
So back in the day, when it is growing up, we used to fast on Good Friday, and there's something called a cross bun, and it's sold only on Good Friday, where the local bakeries they sell a bun with a cross on it, and we attended a 3 hour church service from I think from noon till 3 p.m.
Yeah, so
and
this sounds like a great holy day. What happened, Isaac? Why is there no fasting? The 3 hours. Listen, let's be honest. You could go to on Zoom for 3 hours. I'm sure there are 3 hour services.
Yeah, but it's not quite the same thing, right? So when I'm in 3 hour service, you're there physically, that you sang a song, the minister preached, like
You could
it's
sing
said,
along.
like the entire church was there. But I haven't fasted for Good Friday in a long while. So
So this is actually a great introduction for what we're going to talk about today,
mhm.
because we're going to actually talk about what is the nature of prescription to Christians, and maybe we could pick on you a little bit to try to understand how fasting changed in your life in any way. But let's start with the text. Take it out there. This is very exciting. This is one of the very, very, this is a very Matthean text, as it doesn't show up in Mark or Luke. So let's get started.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, verse 17 onwards. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass in the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
Wow. So this is really interesting from a very simple perspective of this is a very large change in the Sermon on the Mount now, right? We had our Beatitudes, we had a couple of parables, allegories, and now we're almost getting defensive Jesus. Did you ever accuse Jesus that he has come to destroy the law? I know I have not.
You have not? I thought you did, right? Because this is the verse I quote.
No, I say Paul did that. Jesus
Paul,
definitely didn't.
yeah. So we've quoted this verse multiple times in different contexts where he has said, "I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them." And so I think we've informally discussed what does it mean that he came to abolish, that he did not abolish the law, but versus he fulfilled the law, and what this means.
Okay, so we're definitely going to take this slowly, trying to figure out exactly what is meant. But I think the opening is that there's no way that this could be an unprovoked situation. This seems to be an accusation that is being leveled against Jesus, because no one would start. Just imagine a parallel in your life. I give some nice talk. I gave some nice parables, and then goes, by the way, I'm not doing this. I'm not here to steal your children. I'm not here to go run amok. This is not something one would do without accusations. And this goes into the historicity of these texts. The fact that this is only Matthew, and independent of what Jesus said or didn't say, I think this is very important that this is specifically in the Matthean community, because as we speak about one of your favorite words, Antinomianism, and what would it mean in this context, this is a absolute apologetic for an Antinomian attitude. I am not coming to throw away the stuff. I love this
Okay,
stuff. I'm
okay,
part of
okay,
this
okay,
stuff.
okay. Hold on. Okay, so how do you jump from that to antinomianism? Like
Well,
how?
that's the opening line. I did not come to throw away the law. You're not going to change one word of the law. That's what he's saying. He's saying that I am not antinomianistic. So to put it in a historical context, if you think of Marcion of Sinope, which we talked about multiple times, he's one of the first people, even though he lived a little bit overlapping this and a little bit later than the Matthean community. He's the one who he read the Old Testament and he said, that is trash. That is absolutely, if you want to pretend that the Tanakh is true from Marcion's perspective, then there's two gods. There's the lower God, the junkie God, the evil God that wrote the Old Testament, and then the good guy, the higher God, came along and said that this is how to do it. It's unclear if Marcion really felt that, some kind of dualism about God, but what he did recognize is that Jesus's message, from his perspective, independently exists. He does not need to rely on the past of those people. And what's interesting is that the Christians in the 2nd century all labeled him a heretic because they felt that there is a point in history where we can either keep the Old Testament, keep all the Old Testament prophecies, see Jesus as a fulfillment of the Jewish word, or see him as a breakaway. And if anything, Paul's the middle category, right? Paul's like, yeah, we'll rely on it, but what we see in this specific line in Matthew is that there's a fear of antinomianism. There's a fear that Jesus is kind of like Marcion. He's a person who's coming to destroy, coming to change, coming to revolutionize. We keep talking about how there's a context that Jesus exists in. And you and I would have no problem if Jesus breaks those walls and runs as a revolutionary into a different sphere. But what Matthew wants us to know is that is not what is happening. Right, you look
Okay,
like
so yeah, thank you for that background. Now, my initial objection to that would be, or response to that would be,
it could be an objection. I'm okay with that, Isaac.
yeah.
Objection
So chapter 5, right? Chapter 5, verses 3 onwards, he speaks about blessed are you, blessed are this, blessed are that. All of that, in a sense, is opposed to the law. At least law as you know, as understood.
It's not prescriptive, though. It's not prescriptive or proscriptive. This is very clear. If someone speaks spiritually, it's not being antinomianistic or not. If someone says eat pig, that's antinomianistic. If someone, it's very, it's a big question in Jewish world about how much we could legislate metaphysics or spirituality.
Okay, so yeah, so let's. So my question is, so in what we've read so far in Matthew 5, from verses 5, Matthew 5, which part of this is, which verse leading up to verse 17 is advocating for an antinomianistic view?
What a great question. So you're noting that the arc doesn't seem to make sense.
Correct.
And as we mentioned from the start, there are 5 sections of Matthew that are viewed as like the speeches of Jesus. And when we look at it from a religious perspective versus from a historical perspective, we probably come to different conclusions. So, for example, if I was looking at this from a historical perspective, not from a religious perspective, I would note probably the Beatitudes are one unit, that the salt and light parable is another unit. And this seems to be a completely separate unit, aside from the fact that it doesn't have any synoptic parallels. It's a completely different kind of is the first time he's speaking to people. He's like, by the way, this is kind of like a dialogue. So I would advocate these to be independently sourced speeches. So 100% we should worry about, from a religious perspective, the arc of the Sermon on the Mount. And I do think we could do that. But from an actual, like, if you think of a paracopy, that this is just one statement or one paragraph, I do think this does somewhat exist independent, and it's addressing a specific either crowd or ideology or accusation that is being thrown against Christians, either early on, but more likely some point in the Matthean community, some point probably between 50 and 80. It's always hard to extricate ourselves also from the temple. The temple was the way to kind of do the word of God. But we'll go back to that. So I don't have an answer to you, except for that I would say we should view this as somewhat independently. But I will note to you, I think it's like a fun contemporaneous topic. If I would say to you now, yeah, I know, Isaac, you care about Amos, you care about Jeremiah, you care about Samuel, but the reason Marcion was against those people was not only because of they had good and bad ideas, but also because he was somewhat antinomianistic. And if I asked you today, Isaac, would you say that Marcion won? If you think of what took place in the 2nd century, he was a heretic. And I'm not putting aside the Bible stuff about, yeah, the Bible's important, great, but about how Christians choose to live their lives today. I would say Marcion maybe was onto something, and if anything, Paul and him could be more closely aligned than we would think.
I think so. Yes, I mean, yeah, that's something. Yeah, that I cannot I cannot disagree on that. So I think his view, or the Pauline view of antinomianism, that's culturally more accept. That's one which is culturally accessible. It's prevalent. It's what people. Um, again, to something we discussed earlier. Nobody starts with blessed are the poor in spirit. They speak about, you confess, you do something, you repent, you change your attitude, and then you go to the kingdom of heaven. But then the Beatitudes have a completely, I see, even though they might not be prescriptive, they are, they have a much richer meaning. And so to your earlier question, I think that the Marcion view, or his view of antinomianism, is common, is prevalent. It might not be theologically accurate, but it's culturally uh,
Again, like it's interesting. It's hard to divorce Marcion from his attitude towards the Tanakh and the Old Testament, but if we could, that'd be something at least noteworthy. Even before we start going line by line through the verse, we also have I guess the fundamental underlying question of the break between Paul and the Church of Jerusalem. In the first synod would have been the year 48, very early, accepted by most, if not all, denominations of Christianity today. And what we see is that it seems, at least from already in the first century, in the year 50, in the late 40s, there was a question: is it okay to be Christian and not Jewish? It's not clear, because what we see is that one of the criticisms that we see, like for example, in Acts 21:21, or just generally some of the many things that Paul is addressing, is that James in the early church probably felt like, listen, we understand circumcision is the worst thing in the world. No adult wants to do it. And if that becomes a barrier in order to becoming Jewish, Jesus probably would not have wanted that. So therefore, let's break the Christian community in the late 40s. This is so early, into the Jewish Christians and the pagan Christians, or the Christian Christians, or the converted Christians, however you want to call it. And this was, I think, what was advocated by the Church of Jerusalem early on, because you have this problem that the law is hard. The law seems to be given from the Old Testament to the Jews. So if we're going to be like Pauline about it, or at least recognize that there are non-Jews who want to become Jesus followers, but maybe not necessarily Judaism followers, then maybe we should have a way for them to access Jesus, especially if he's going to be the Messiah for the whole earth in a universalistic and ubiquitous sense, as opposed to just for the Jews. And we have this early break that 100% disappears. If you think again, like I don't want to keep skipping 1900 years to look at our world today, but if you can even, when we think of Jewish Christians, which people do identify that way, Jews identify Jewish Christians as Christians. When a person says, oh, I'm a Jew, but I believe in Jesus, we go, oh, you're Christian. And this break that took place in year 48 between the Church of Jerusalem and the early church, and what we would say is Pauline Christianity, or even the rest of Christianity, maybe not even Pauline, was something that we see that is completely dissolved. And that dichotomy, that bifurcation, also could be something that is being addressed in this verse, in that there might be some Jews that Jesus came for, and they should keep keeping the law, and for them, they should keep the law. But other people, don't worry about it. Don't get a circumcision, which is always the starting point of conversion. Don't go to get baptized towards Judaism if you have to. So that's something also I think we have to keep into
Yeah.
that conversation as we discuss this.
Yeah, thank you for that, so thank you for those comments. Now, I think we also have to look at the purpose of circumcision as to why, and I think Paul touches upon this in his defense as to why this was even instituted to begin with, right? And I think, and so to your point, right? Is it so? Do you identify being Jewish as just being circumcised? Is that what is he saying?
You're
Is
not
keeping?
Jewish unless you're circumcised, right? So that's a starting point. In order to convert, or any time, when you look at in the Abraham stories, and the Moses and Joshua stories, in the stories of Jacob and his sons, circumcision is a rite of passage to be part of the Jewish family.
So, wouldn't you say that Abraham was Jewish even before circumcision?
So Jews call him a Hebrew. They don't call him Jew. We don't believe, like at least Jews today, from a philosophical perspective, don't believe that Jews are Jews until Mount Sinai. But putting it aside, he was what we would call part of our Jewish extended family, but we call him a Hebrew. But more importantly, it's the circumcision is the rite of passage. And this is something that they literally were arguing about in that time period.
So are you saying that by circumcision he undergoes some form of metaphysical change, that prior to that he was
it's a form of self-mutilation that identifies you with the Jewish community?
Yeah, but okay, but Abraham was the starting point of that. So you're saying that, like he, as a person who first went through that, or he instituted that, that he went through some form of change, metaphysical change,
I
which
don't
leading
speak
up.
as a metaphysician very often. I'll speak of that. This was the equivalent of a tattoo to be marked as part of the Jewish community at that time. And again, like let's just skip to like today. If you want to convert today, you get circumcised, you go to get baptized in a mikvah, you go immerse, and then you say a couple things in front of a court. Circumcision has always been a rite of passage in order to be Jewish, without exception. And that's why I think it was such an important question, because it was viewed as like evil a little bit by the Romans. It was viewed as self-mutilation. It was viewed as contradictory to human nature, in that the natural world gave you a foreskin, keep the foreskin. So I think it was Paul and others recognized that it was a massive impediment to proper proselytization and outreach in order to keep that.
Well, I would say Paul probably would have gone beyond that and said that it's theologically, it does not fit with the person and the message of
Well, I
Jesus.
know, but that's already later. I'm saying already
Yeah.
that was the issue that the Church of Jerusalem was dealing with in 48. This was already an issue, like so early on, that about how they're going to deal with this. And again, like when you look at the Acts in 21, it says, they have been told about you that you teach all the Jews living among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, and that you tell them to not circumcise their children, observe the customs. That is literally the accusation to Paul that is said. And that for them would have been hard to stomach, because how could Jesus come for people who are uncircumcised? It seems before the Church of Jerusalem, the Council of Jerusalem, that was an impossibility. And again, the way I read this is that the Council of Jerusalem want to set up two groups. They kind of gave in to Paul. They said, Jesus came for the Jews. We'll try to convert or proselytize all the Jews to be Jesus followers. But then there will be Christians who will be Jesus followers, but of pagan descent. And we'll have like the Jews who will keep the law, keep like not eat pig, not get tattooed. And then there'll be Christians who are pagan descent who kind of will have to keep a different set of laws, but also be messiness from a Jesus perspective. That's kind of like how I read this early break in the first century.
Okay.
Okay, so let's look at the verse, because the verse has so much to say. Let's do the first one. So don't think that I came to destroy the law or prophets. I didn't come to destroy, but to fulfill. Okay, Isaac, what does it mean to destroy the law? What does it mean? Let's play devil's advocate. Jesus came to destroy the law. Sure. What would he be doing? What would he be saying? How would he go about
destroy the law in this sense? I think what he's meaning to is the prophetic word contained in the law and the prophets, saying that I came as not as in my life is not meant to go against the grain of the prophetic word of the law and the prophet, but more as in I want to see it to completion, or that is the purpose of my life. That's the way I understand this. So destroy here as in the essence, or the prophetic essence of the law, the law and the prophets, something which was fulfilled in his life.
Okay, let me structure the question a little bit differently. Let's imagine the verse said, "Think not that I have come to change the law or the prophets. I have not come to change, but to fulfill." Would you have a problem with that?
Change. I'll have to think about
the word
it.
Destroy is such a strong word that I want us to take seriously.
Now, okay, so the word. So thank you for that. So the word destroy is the same word, and so destroy has its own implications or meanings
destroy
in English.
Means utter, like the temple was destroyed.
Destroyed,
it ceases to exist.
Yeah. So he's saying, I did not come to change. So destroy could be.
It's a very powerful word.
Yeah. So destroy could mean I did not come to change or remove or kill, but I came to build
I'm saying change and destroy differently. Change is I'm not saying the opposite, but change is very, very different than destroy. And he uses it twice in this verse.
Yeah, I don't have an answer. I really haven't thought about it. So destroy and change. I mean, so part of this is, as a Pauline, this type probably gloss over this. Oh yeah, Jesus came. He didn't come to abolish the law, but he came to fulfill the law. But we asked me, like, what does it mean to destroy or to change? I don't have
possibilities out there. So think not that I've come to destroy the law. One way that you could destroy a law, I would say, in the most concrete way, is what Marcion says, in that there is a complete break with the past. You might, for example, if I say, Isaac, don't murder, even if I say there's an old law in the Code of Hammurabi that says don't murder, and then I make that law again, don't murder, I may not be using the Code of Hammurabi. I might just be using a whole new system to come about do that. So it could be when Jesus is coming and the Messianic era is upon us, it could be that every single thing in the past has ended and there's a new kingdom of heaven, a new land on the way on the land. And even if you happenstance fulfill some of the laws, it won't be because you're fulfilling the Old Testament or you're fulfilling Tanakh. It's because I am now legislating it now, and because it's completely anew. And Jesus is saying, no, there is no complete cessation of the past. There's a continuation of the past into the current and into the future. So that'd be
And
one.
yeah, okay,
That's one possibility. The other possibility, which I think is how most people would read, most people don't read it that way. Most people would say that they look at the way that Christianity changed the world subsequently to Jesus' death, and they say no one could properly say that Christians are properly executing the biblical, let alone the rabbinic law, but the biblical law appropriately. So it does look like, retroactively, when I look at Christianity, it did come to destroy the law. So you look at it as that the law ceases to exist in the way that it was meant to be. So it's not that Jesus is starting a new era, it's that I'm just noting, I'm observing the reality that it looks like Christians have no problem eating pig. It looks like Christians have no problem not getting circumcised. So therefore, Jesus is coming. My messiahship is not about trying to uproot the law and change it. And I think this second read definitely fits better with what we're going to see in the next verse. So I think it's very important that we differentiate between destroy and change. Everyone recognizes that Jesus came to change the law. It says over 20 times in the Pentateuch, in the 5 books of Moses, that any Messiah that comes to change anything, don't believe. In the end of the day, Jesus changed things. You can't deny he changed things. And
so
that's what
so
Messiah do.
so here's the thing, right? So we from what we discussed so far, the Sermon on the Mount, it builds upon what's in the Old Testament. Or the all the verses, blessed are you, blessed are this. It doesn't change any law. It doesn't change. It doesn't add. It's not something new. It takes all of these have a precedent in the Old Testament, either in the Psalms or the prophets or Deuteronomy, and then it builds on top of them, puts them in a context, puts them in a way in which it makes it come alive. So based upon that, wouldn't you say that the first model is more accurate one where he's not changing what's there, but he takes that and then he's building on top of that?
Well, I think that
Versus,
I think the first model is a cessation and start anew. So I think that what you're describing in your holy self is very similar to what St. Augustine describes about how it is that Jesus is building upon what it is that Moses did, and in no way is it a break. So have you ever heard like the 6 points about how St. Augustine notes about how Jesus is in no way a break from Moses?
I'll have to look it up now.
Okay.
It's
So
not.
in his work, Reply to Faustus,
Mhm.
he writes that there's 6 points. So number one, Jesus personally obeyed the law, which you could write a book on. You could argue, but it does seem to obey most stuff. He fulfilled the messianic predictions, which we keep talking about how maybe that's important about how you could get as many predictions as you possibly can. He empowered the people to obey the law, which we see specifically. I'd say St. Augustine is citing this right here in Matthew chapter 5. He brought out its true meaning, which is like a very, very subversive kind of idea. What is a true meaning of a text? Number 5, St. Augustine says he explained the true meaning behind the rituals and ceremonies. And therefore, I think that's what you were trying to say about Paul, that maybe there's some idea about how you could evaluate circumcision a little differently. And the 6th one, which I think is the most important one, he gave additional commands that further the intention of the law. But what we see in all 6 of these things is never do we see that Jesus obliterated or abrogated any of the laws. He brought its true meaning. He showed the true meaning. He personally obeyed. But what we never see is that Jesus ate pig. But we never see that Jesus said, don't get circumcised. And it's really, really interesting when you look at St. Augustine. I think he would be very disappointed to see the antinomianistic tendencies towards certain aspects of the church when he views that this line of Matthew is literally to lay the groundwork for Isaac fasting on Good Friday, and for other people to specifically keep the Old Testament ideas.
Okay. I'm tracking. Yeah.
Okay, so anyways, that's a good question. I didn't come to destroy, but also in that verse we have, I think, probably one of the most famous ideas that I have personally no understanding of. When I say Jesus did not come to A, B, and C, but he came to fulfill the law. So you already hinted, you already said what you think fulfill means, but let's hear it again. What does it mean that Jesus came to fulfill the law?
Yeah, so my understanding is this goes back to this quote. I think it builds on one of the observations from Saint Augustine, where he brought the prophetic was in he the law and the prophets, by definition, they had a prophetic what do you call it, a side to them, where things were going to will come. They were future oriented, and he brought that to life. The prophetic part of the gospel of the prophets of the law were came to life, came to fruition in his life. And also a second part is that so much of the law was prescriptive as to how things should be, and he embodied them in his life and showed a way as to how this can be done. Now we touched upon this when we discussed the Sermon on the Mount, where no human being can have all these 8 or 9 qualities: blessed to be poor in spirit, and to be pure in heart, and to be this, and to be that. And it's just humanly not possible. But from a Christian perspective, we believe that Jesus was able to embody each of these 8 or 9, 10, 10 things. And so in that sense, he fulfilled the law, as in it's humanly not, we know that humanly it's not possible for anyone to at all times to obey to keep all 10 commandments and to keep the law. But Jesus in his divine, but again, being the
Okay,
person
so
he was.
you said a lot. Let's break it down into a couple pieces. So number one, you're kind of saying that there's a spirit of the law, and Jesus is the 100% practitioner of the spirit of the law.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing. That's what he was lying down in the Beatitudes. That's what he's lying down in the parables, and that's possible. If anything, Marcion on the one hand and Irenaeus on the other hand will argue about what it means to fulfill law. So let me give you two opposite definitions of fulfill, and then you can at least hear what the argument is. So one idea is, Isaac, you have a test, and you studied for the test, you got 100, you passed your schooling, you get your degree. You fulfilled all the requirements, aka you're done. You never ever have to go and study again that topic unless you want to have continued education. You fulfilled. So in that context, the word fulfill means finished, completed, it's over. And that's one way to look at what Jesus did. So if Jesus did it, he fulfilled it. It means it does not have to be done anymore. And if anything, it's very, I would say, ironic, because the first half of the verse is saying that I'm not changing anything, and the second half of the verse is saying that's a lie. I'm changing everything. So I personally don't like that read, but I think the way that Marcion and that Gnostics and Manichaeisms and Simon Magus and all the anti-Nicene church fathers would read this. Oh, sorry, and all the Nicene church fathers read this is saying that it's very important to know that you don't have to do this anymore because fulfilled. Okay, that's one. The other definition of fulfilled, and this is what I'd say is the Jewish definition, that the word fulfilled in Hebrew is kiyum. Kiyum or mekayem is a very, very super common word. And we say you have an obligation to fulfill commandments. So when I say you have an obligation to fulfill commandments, it doesn't mean that you do it and now it's over. It means you have an obligation to establish them as part of your lives, to do them. So fulfill means that constitutes. So for example, Isaac, you have an obligation to fulfill the commandment of charity. So you gave charity once. Does that mean you never have to give charity again? Of course not. It means that you did it once. It may not be an integral part of your life. So I think the way that we read the word fulfill here is that exact dichotomy between executed, fulfilled, completed on the one hand, or fulfilled means that you did, you established, and you continue have to do. I personally feel the second read is a better read.
Yeah,
From the first half of the verse, But I would say most Christians disagree with me.
Yeah,
If you
they
ask a
probably.
Christian on the street, what does it mean that Jesus fulfilled the law? It means that you don't have to do it anymore.
Yeah. So okay, now I think so. Well, let me try to rephrase what he's saying. The first one is saying that Jesus, he finished the work, like he met the legal requirements. The example you gave was, you do
You
these
finish
things
school,
like
you
I
fulfilled
finished
all your
school,
requirements.
you do this. So, well, and the second one says that you've done this once, you've made this your, your way of life. You've done so it sets you on a pathway to character.
That's what we mean in Jewish circles, right? You Mekayem
Uh,
ha-mitzvah. You
See,
fulfill.
I think the second. So okay, it depends. So the first one, there is a place where it does fulfill, where it is accurate. So it depends on how it's used in theology. So this is the basis for the entire book of Hebrews, where Hebrews speaks about Jesus. He offered a sacrifice once, and that's complete. And then you have the priest who offer the sacrifice again and again, because theirs is more as a human thing. So from the perspective of sin and pay and the penalty of sin, the first model applies, where Jesus has paid the price. And but in the context of, to embody the spirit of what to embody the spirit of the law, that's where the second model applies, where it's more, it's this active thing where we strive, where we live out, where we have, it's not just saying Jesus fulfilled the law. That's the antinomianism part of that. But then to also go, yes, he did this, and now it's is by his grace, by the work of the Spirit, we are called to follow in his footsteps, to live lives which exemplify him. So I think it's both and, as in the
Well,
first
they're
one applies.
opposite.
Well, see, I don't say, well, the first one applies, the concept of the first one applies
I
for the
think most
as.
Christians would say they like the first one, but we just to be clear, we have the same ambiguous kind of issue when we look at the next verse. So just like to open up, for verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one iota, one letter, one yud, whatever this means, or nothing will pass from the law until it be fulfilled. So again, we have the problem of it's always unclear when Jesus speaks in metaphors or not. So on the one hand,
That's true, yes. Huh?
yeah, it's somewhat complicated because on the one hand, when I read this as a good Jew, I just read that it will never end. The idea of when heaven and earth end or come to pass, normally that's a metaphor for saying heaven and earth, as we all know from a biblical perspective or from an Aristotelian perspective, goes on forever and it'll never pass. But if you're a good Christian, you go, oh, you mean when the world ends and Jesus comes again and fire and brimstone. So when you see this idea till heaven and earth pass, if it's a metaphor, it just means forever. And it's very normal to speak that way. On the other hand, but it might just mean that maybe the end of days will come upon us and it will pass. And therefore, then you don't have to keep stuff anymore. And if we're living in the end times and the end of days in some eschatological time period that we don't have to keep that anymore because Jesus came and changed the world metaphysically, then we already have the end of days and it came to pass and you don't have to keep the stuff anymore. And therefore, now our point, the law has been fulfilled. And
So,
therefore, you know,
so I think, so Rabbi, I think it goes back to, let's focus a bit on what's meant by the law has been fulfilled. There's a concept of repentance, of paying for paying the penalty for sin. At the time of Jesus, right? When the Gospels were written, the animals were sacrificed as the payment, as what do you call it, a form of repentance for sin, or a sacrifice for sin, or animals were sacrificed as the penalty for sin. Right now, I think in that context, when I read this as Jesus paid the penalty, as in he paid the price for the sins, for since the whole world. In that context, he has fulfilled the law. But in the context of what does it mean to embody the law? What does it mean to embody the spirit? That's an ongoing work. I don't look at it as, so that's a place where I don't read this from the from an antinomian view to say, because he did, there is nothing more for me to
well,
do,
again,
or I don't have a role in
have a
this.
certain practicalness, though. The question is, how do people read it? And I think when you like the main justification for an antinomianistic perspective on Christianity is that the law was already fulfilled. So I actually read this second verse right here that I read 5:18 as almost not sarcastic, but allegorical and rhetorical. Just so you know, I said in the last verse in 5:17, I'm not here to change anything. Heaven and earth could pass, and not one thing will ever change. because you'll always have to do it to all be fulfilled, because it'll never be fulfilled. You always have to keep it. So that's how I personally read it. But that's I think
So
from
yeah, so on this note, I'm intrigued. What do you make of Hebrews 7:26, 20? So let me read these couple verses to you. I'm reading for the last couple of days.
oh my
Hebrews
God,
7,
reading very dangerous.
Hebrews 7, Hebrews 7, 26 onwards, right? For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated for sinners, and exalted above the
Exalted
heavens.
above the heavens.
Yeah, he has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for their own sins, and then for those for the people, since he died once for all when he offered up himself. For the
Yeah,
law
I think
appoint
that's super
for the
antomianistic.
yeah
I agree. I feel like that's, I'm saying that when we realize that there's this Council of Jerusalem having a different attitude from Pauline Christianity and from maybe many of, and from the epistles to the Hebrews, I think that kind of explains this, that there's two groups of Christians. As you know, the epistles is traditionally ascribed to Paul because this is very, very Pauline kind of attitude.
Yeah. So, well, the place where I would, the place where for me it becomes antinomianism when it says, because of this, I don't have anything else to do, or because of this, it's just a mental change, but without a change in life, without a change in how a person lives or who they are, or the kind of
Again, like it's just like I agree, but like you should realize that the whole,
yeah.
like when you think of the audience of Hebrews, the main audience that most people say it's for are for the extreme Antinomians versus the people who want people to convert. This was
Yes.
literally addressed to those people. You're bringing the most like classic example of the argument for Antinomianism to argue that maybe we're not so Antinomianistic. Like this is the argument. Hebrews is where we get this from. This theology of supersession of the church replacing Israel, and then we don't need these commandments anymore because it's fulfilled. This is the argument of the epistles of Hebrews. So,
See.
so I would say, yeah, great, but that's the question that Matthew's dealing with. Okay, our last verse: whoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and there's this idea in rabbinic Judaism that you're supposed to treat all commandments equally, a big
Mhm.
one and a small one, but we do recognize that there's smaller commandments and bigger ones. Murder versus getting baptized, there might be a difference. And thou shalt teach men so, he shall be called the least of the kingdom of heaven. So I decided that it's important to read all three of these verses together, 17, 18, 19, because I think they're one theme. I think Jesus is saying in a very traditional Pharisaic way, you got to keep the stuff. And if you don't keep the stuff, you're really not part of the kingdom of heaven. The stuff might push you the wrong way. You might do it for the wrong spiritual reason. You might not understand why you're doing it. You might need me to explain it. But I think he's acting as a somewhat good Pharisee in this way, that you have to go keep the laws. And 17, 18, 19 is really one theme. And people who interpret fulfill in our first way are really missing the boat, in my opinion. Whoever shall teach, but whoever shall do and teach them shall be called the king of heaven. It sounds like it's what a great speech to be a good Pharisee, And I think when E.P. Sanders talks about Jesus being a Pharisee, he looks at this verse and he looks at 17, 18, 19. He says, do it, teach it, feel it, and you change anything, you're a heretic. Okay. Isaac, would you like to add anything?
Yeah. So okay. So what is your biggest takeaway from these three verses? So as we discussed,
Christians were meant to be Jews.
Christus division.
I'm not joking. That's I think that the Council of Jerusalem had a take on what it meant to be a Jew, and a Christian was a form of Jew, and the
Yeah.
Council of Jerusalem recognized that there might be people who aren't going to be Jews; they're going to be
Yeah.
pagan, Christian, pagan, whatever, and they didn't like that. And James wanted to be more authentically follow in Jesus' footsteps by following the law. And I
Mhm.
think that the biggest question that we keep talking about, we spoke about last time about discipleship.
Yeah.
So
Was Jesus?
who cares that Jesus said this? Let's say Jesus said this and other people either interpret him or take him out of context or really give him the true context. Do we really have to follow the kind of Christianity, or you, not me, do you have to follow the kind of Christianity that Jesus is advocating, or is it okay the various ways it evolves? And if you're a Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, Catholic, or whatever, it's just like Jesus did what he did. He was a moment in time, and the way it spreads, it is what it is. And as long as you look to Jesus as your starting point, that's fine, because even Jesus, within 20, just like Muhammad, within 20 years after these guys disappear, we literally have two movements with very
Okay,
different ideologies.
okay, so to your question, let me put it this way. Did Jesus know that the world will last 2,000 years since he lived on this earth? Did he?
Oh, look at you. What kind of
Okay,
prophet was Jesus?
no. Okay, I'm asking you, do you think from your perspective that he knew that this world will change in this way? So when I read the Gospels, it felt like Peter and Paul, all the others, they felt the world is going to end right now, maybe in the next few days, the next few years. To them, living at that time felt like the end of times. Do you think at that time they had any inclination that this world will last for 2,000 years and go through the sea wide of change? You know, everything about the world we live right now is completely different than the world in which they're from, the world in which the apostles and the early audience, from the world of the audience, and I mean the world of the apostles and the early audience. And so
So
how do you?
I think the answer is, again, talking about Jesus as a prophet, I have no comments, because who knows what people tell the truth. But I could tell you there was a guy named Shabtai Tzvi. He lived in the 17th century, roughly in the 1650s. And he was a messianic figure. He was a Jewish Messiah. He was a Kabbalist. And a lot of Jews sold their property. They said it's the end of days. They threw away all their lives. They moved in order to kind of move to Israel to try to fulfill the Sabbatean movement. And they thought 100% it was the end of days. And I think the hallmark of a good messianism is a belief in the end of days. And if you don't believe that the end of days are here, then you're not really a good messianist. So if you ask, for example, my wife, Esther, who's a good messianist, she would say that, tomorrow Messiah could come, and we have to be ready for that. And you have to be able to ready to like leave your life now and kind of jump on the boat and be like that way. So
That
did
that's
Shabtai
it.
Tzvi and
That's a
his
good
believers?
Christian. That's a good Christian. That's what Christians believe too. The
Sure.
Messiah will. Yeah.
But my point is that if you do a Google search for messianic characters, you'll find, in Jewish circles at least, you'll find more than one within every 100 years, last 2,000 years. So no Messiah believes that the world's going to continue as it is, but every single Messiah has been wrong, without
Mm,
exception.
okay.
So what we see in that is that again, the most destructive one after Christianity for Judaism was the Shabtai Tzvi movement of the
Mhm.
17th century. And what happens is that there's destruction in its aftermath. Because if you're wrong and you say that like you're at end of a book or end of a stage of your life and you're just wrong, then you have to continue while setting up the precedents in your life in
Yeah.
a wrong way. So it's a problem.
So thank you for that response. Now, uh, going back to your earlier question, right? You mentioned Christianity has all these different denominations, branches. Each one is different. It's important to live the way Jesus described in this gospel over here, or to live, or to live as a good Methodist, an Episcopalian, Anglican, whatever you name it. Let me rephrase this to you, right? Even within Judaism, there is multiple strands of Judaism.
Amen.
Amen, right? So isn't it fair to say that all of these strands just reflection of humans, um, a lack of understanding of completeness, or we cannot grasp reality, we cannot have a complete grasp on reality. We all have some grasp, but it's hard for us to say that we all have a complete, that our grasp of reality is the most perfect grasp of reality. And maybe each of these denominations and people, they all have a grasp on reality. I mean, there are some differences, yes, from one to the other, um, but that's just an aspect of life. That's just an aspect of living. It's how life has always been and how it'll always be.
So I think
And
you're talking the language now, sociology. And so you're just saying that this is the nature of psychology and social psychology and human nature, and this is how kind of things work. And once a guy dies, things branch out and they change, and you can't really relive what life was like in the first century because we live different world, and that's how it is for Jews, that's how it is for Christians, and we shouldn't think otherwise. And that's
I
true.
I think that would be that true. Yeah. What do you
Yeah.
say to that?
No, so I mean I agree with you in general, but I think that the question is, now that we're reading this, when Martin Luther read this in the 16th century, and he coined the term antinomian, right? Because he was against the soteriology of of the new Lutherans that were existing at this time, right? So when John Wesley and other Methodists attacked severe, antinomianism, they were coming from a perspective of, they read the Matthew and they read these attitudes towards antinomianism, and they're like, you can't be like that. And I think Martin Luther during the Reformation was very much trying to find the happy medium between what would be to be a good Christian, because he obviously included Paul and all of St. Paul's stuff in his religion. So what would it mean to be a good Christian while also not rejecting the law? So I think this is something that is a problem. And the question is, now that you read this, you read Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 19, like, what do you do with it? I think what Martin Luther did with it is to try to find the happy medium between the Church of Jerusalem and Paul. And I think the Reformation was very focused on this kind of ideology about making sure to kind of go back to what would be a good read of these texts.
Yes. Yeah, but to your point, Martin Luther relied exclusively on Paul, or he relied more on Paul and less on Matthew. And so as a result of that, we probably have, antinomianism is more prevalent. If Martin Luther had probably swung the other way around, or if he had other folks along the way who were able to preach a message which also had a strong focus on Matthew, then maybe life would have been different. But this is where we are, and I think we cannot deny that there is some underlying tension between Matthew and Paul. They have two different strands, and
Thank God, they're separate books. Otherwise, Okay, Isaac.
okay. On that note, well, Rabbi, thank you. It's lots to think
I'm
about.
sorry we didn't go back to analyzing why you chose to not fast anymore, but we could pick up another time.
Okay, Rabbi. On that note, thank you. Have a great Shabbos. Enjoy your Pesach celebrations, and have a great Shabbos. And hopefully the Messiah will not come until we meet next.
We could pray he doesn't come until then.
Yeah, but if he does, it is what it is. Well, on that note, thank you, and talk to you next week again. Thank you.